It is Bark Week. And of course, this is Myles Garrett. We're doing one player every single week. And this week, we're kicking it off with Myles Garrett. And I thought, let's look back on the 2017 draft, because the Browns, of course, chose Myles Garrett number 1 overall in that draft. It was also the draft that produced Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. But I guess the funny thing is, when you look back on that draft, the Bears get ripped on, the Jaguars get ripped. A lot of teams get ripped on for passing on Mahomes and Watson, but the Browns kind of never do, honestly, which speaks, I think, to Myles Garrett. Let's go back to that draft. Do you believe Myles Garrett has lived up to being the number 1 overall pick in that draft?
I think he has to a degree, but when you look back at the way that draft shook out, I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I wrote about this as the Browns were playing Kansas City in the playoffs, the first thing that comes to mind is, why didn't they think more of Patrick Mahomes that year, right? If the Chiefs thought enough of him to trade up significantly to get him at number 10, then why didn't the Browns really give more thought to a player that could go down as maybe the second best quarterback of all time when all is said and done? Now, we don't know how it's going to shake out. That's a big mouthful of something to say about Patrick Mahomes right now. But just from a talent standpoint, I think you and I both agree when we talk now, we see that kind of potential in him. It's going to take a lot to catch Tom Brady, but Patrick Mahomes just has such amazing, tremendous, natural physical ability that I don't think it's too far-fetched to speak about him in those terms. So what didn't the Browns see in him back then? And I think when I reported that out, what I came to the conclusion is that they just were not on the same page as an organization at that time. You had Sashi Brown at horrible odds with Hugh Jackson. And you just can't run an organization like that. You're just not going to get anywhere when you have that kind of misalignment. Now, I think people could argue, hey, most people didn't have Patrick Mahomes ranked where anybody would have taken him number 1. Well, first of all, I asked John Dorsey, and he said unequivocally they would have taken him number 1 overall had they had the number 1 overall pick. Of course, it's easy to say that in retrospect, but that's what I'm told, or that's what he told me. So there's that. But I think really the bottom line was there just wasn't organizational consensus at that time on a quarterback. You had Sashi and some others in the organization, and I'm told Hugh as well, liking Mitch Trubisky an awful lot. You didn't really have enough people in the organization liking Deshaun Watson enough. Obviously, if they did, they would have taken him right there at number 12 instead of trading down. And so I think because they couldn't agree on a quarterback, they were like, hey, let's take the can't miss generational pass rusher who is also arguably the highest rated player on almost everybody's board. And that's basically what happened. They took the sort of surefire can't miss player in the draft because at that time they were not on the same page on a quarterback.
Look, let's be honest. The baseline of this conversation is that in any redraft, there's no argument. Mahomes goes 1 and Watson goes 2. So that being said, based on how it all played out, did the Browns, aside from taking a quarterback, which would have been what they should have done, let's take that out of the equation though, did they take the right guy there at number 1, and has he lived up to that expectation of being an edge rusher taken number 1 overall?
Yes, it worked out for them beautifully. And that is why you do not hear anybody really complaining too much about the way that draft went down, at least for now. We'll have to see how it goes over the next 5 or 10 years, because this thing is going to go on for a long time, talking about this very pivotal 2017 draft, which changed the fortunes of several franchises. First of all, it completely changed the Chiefs franchise, obviously. They turned themselves into a perennial Super Bowl contender, and they could remain that way for the foreseeable future, depending on how things shake out there. It changed the Browns franchise in that they got, again, a generational pass rusher who, if he stays on this trajectory and continues to play like this, he should make multiple Pro Bowls, multiple All-Pros, And he is a Hall of Fame talent. So if he keeps it up, he should end up in the Hall of Fame. And you can't argue with that, right? Now, you and I have talked about this many times. The more perhaps egregious error in all of this was not taking Deshaun at number 12, because you really could have made up for the whole Patrick Mahomes thing if you would have ended up with Deshaun at number 12. But, and so then you get Myles and Deshaun out of that draft. That's a pretty darn good draft. But when you take it a step further, it looks as though, at least right now, that they made up for all of that by then coming back in 2018 and drafting Baker Mayfield. So you may have ended up with the best scenario for yourself that you possibly could have by taking Myles there at number 1. I mean, if you weren't going to take Patrick, you may have ended up with sort of the next best thing by ending up with Myles, Baker, and Denzel Ward. 3 foundational pieces of what they hope will be a Super Bowl team.